Wind and Tide. Hello and welcome to Family 360,
a podcast of conversations exploring life together,
parenting, and all the ways we are family to each other. I'm Rachel Cram, educator and founding director of Wind and Tide Education Community.
I'm Roy Salmond, audio producer and founder of Whitewater Studios, and together we're the hosts
of Family 360, interviewing specialists,
artists,
and storytellers.
And now for this week's episode. We've had a wonderful first season of guests whose experience, knowledge, and wisdom offered a wide range of ideas on living life together as parents and as friends.
And in communities. And those conversations have shaped us as well. We
sure have.
Carry the words of our guests with us into our own families and friendships.
And we're so thankful for the wisdom that they offer.
Yeah.
This episode is a sampling of our deliciously flavored conversations from our first season, 2020.
Quite the year, as we all know.
Yes, with 30 episodes of guests sharing stories, ideas, and understandings that explore all the ways that we are family to each other.
A child's attitude to reading is of such importance that more often than not it determines his academic fate. Moreover, his experience in learning to read may decide how he feels about learning in general and even himself as an individual.
Parents should see the gift of children as the opportunity to learn from their children to live again in the present, and that actually kids are sent to you not so you can visit your ambitions upon them, but so that they can undermine and subvert your crummy ambitions and get you to spend less time at the office and more time fishing or holding hands.
And that's about being in the present,
It's about being in the present.
Parenting is ultimately about empathy. It's hard to be a parent and it's hard to be a kid. If we can recognize that, then we see it's a shared struggle and a shared opportunity.
So welcome to our Season 1 wrap-up.
Of Family 360.
We are dividing the episode into 4 broad themes that we've seen emerge over this first season. The first we're calling the science of family.
Let's define that. The science of family.
Right.
Okay.
Well, many of our guests discuss discoveries around how we wire and fire as people.
And that wiring and firing begins long before we're born.
Which was fascinating.
We're beginning with counselor and teacher Gila Golub. Gila says, we all look at the world through the lens of our family systems, and that perception shapes our life and our perception of everything.
In her episode, Life Through the Lens of Lineage, she comments on scientific findings around multi-generational trauma. We're jumping in just after Gila describes her mother's childhood struggles with violence and abandonment in wartime Latvia, and how those struggles remain to biologically and neurologically influence Gila and her siblings.
When your mom was going through those struggles in her early years, you were inside of her already.
That is correct.
That's fascinating because that's true of all of us. Can you just talk about that a little bit? What do we know about that now?
Well, the famous study was done at the University of Atlanta where they had mice smell cherry blossoms while they were giving them electric shock, and then they bred the mice for 3 more generations. And then those grand mice puppies were given cherry blossoms to smell, and they went into an electric shock response. We now know that we pass on trauma through the mitochondrial DNA. So whatever trauma has happened in our family system eventually gets passed on. We are all the product of our family system for many generations. Everyone's family of origin affects the people that they are today. There's research going on all over the world.
That's fascinating.
It really is.
Ted Levitt is a family therapist and ADHD specialist. His episode was shared by so many of our listeners, which perhaps confirms the title of his episode, ADHD, Now Playing in a Person Near You.
In the second of his 2-part episode, Ted talks about learned helplessness as a common outlook for people struggling with ADHD or other mental health challenges. In this clip, he describes scientific research that demonstrates how we learn helplessness, how our brains become wired for failure when the challenges of living press in without enough breaks for success.
So learned helplessness was first studied with a rat. They put him in a container of water. He swims around the outside looking for an exit, but there is no exit. So they eventually just stop swimming and float to conserve their energy. It's survival behavior. So after a few trials of that, you take the rat and you put them in a container that does have an exit, and they don't even look for the exit. They just float right away because the brain has learned in these situations you can't get out, so don't try, conserve your energy. And so then what was an adaptive response becomes a maladaptive response. Now it's not helping you. And so in humans, what that looks like is I try to succeed and I don't. I try, I don't, I try, I don't. You know what? Why try? Why would I try? So
You just start floating.
Right, you just start floating. On a purely survival level part of your brain, it is an adaptive strategy. Why would I waste precious energy pursuing something that can never be attained when I can conserve that energy for other things that are attainable? The problem is it's built on a false premise, which is that failure is inevitable, when really it's just possible. And in some cases it might be likely, but it's not inevitable. So the brain then overgeneralizes, which is what everyone's brain does. That's what they're built for, jumping to conclusions and overgeneralizing to simplify the decision-making process. But for the people on the outside looking in, they're like, why wouldn't you even try it? It doesn't make any sense. You like swimming. Why wouldn't you want to go to swimming lessons or be on the swim team? Because that person's brain is saying, well, everyone thinks I'm good at it, but when I got in there, I know I wouldn't do well, and then I'd be embarrassed. So why would I go? I'm just signing up for embarrassment classes. I don't want to do that.
Dr. Vanessa Lapointe was one of our very first guests on Family 360. And Vanessa used the terms dandelion child and orchid child to describe how children neurologically present themselves to the world.
Dandelion children thrive in almost every environment.
We do.
Orchid children require more sensitive care, yet with the right amount of water and light, they thrive and are beautiful.
Dr. Vanessa knows dandelion and orchid children from her decades of research, but also through parenting her own children. Here she is talking about parenting her two sons and how she responds to each differently, knowing that they are wired differently.
So you began by talking about dandelion kids and orchid kids. And again, I'm figuring there's other flowers in between. But when you look at those extremes, does that make a difference for how you step into those situations where there is upset?
Yes, it does. Because you really need to be attuned to who that individual child is. And so I have two boys at home who are now age 15 and almost 12 years. And one of them happens to be what I would call an orchid child, and the other happens to be a dandelion child. And so my oldest son came into the world, and everything's always been a little bit easy for him. He just carries on. He starts school and it's fine. He makes friends really easily. He can fall asleep at the drop of a hat. He just isn't really fussed and bothered about a lot of things. My younger son came into the world, and you could tell right away that everything just kind of got him. He was the 3-year-old that used to hide behind my legs and growl at people that dared to try and say hello to him because he was just so intense and so sensitive. And he took a lot longer than his older brother to start to sort of manifest on the outside in a way that I could really see that there was evidence that his brain was coming along as it needed to. That all happened slower for him. And it wasn't that he was delayed or behind, but rather that because he's so intense and sensitive, he just needed to grow a brain that was that much more powerful in terms of regulating itself than his brother. Before we would start to see on the outside that he was able to kind of hang on to his emotions.
So how did you respond to that as a parent?
So as a parent, what that meant for me is that I had to I'm always pumping my fist in the air and saying, you got to keep the faith because you're growing. It's like that iceberg analogy. There's all this incredible growth happening beneath the surface for that orchid kid that you're maybe not going to see evidence of on the outside for years to come. But to know that by staying the course, by being attuned, by really seeing and hearing who your child is, you are gifting them the eventual reality of being able to be a really independent, really regulated, really incredible human being.
Over the last 2 decades, discoveries of our nervous system and brain,
Neuroscience,
as it's called, yes, that's revealed the interconnectedness of our minds and our bodies and our souls. How we move forth in life is influenced by the neurological wirings woven from generations past, our nature, as it's often referred to.
However, we are also shaped by the knowledge of our experiences we acquire through our interactions with others and with the world around us, which is usually described as nurture in the well-known nature-nurture debates.
And of course, who we are and who our children become is impacted by both of those.
And that leads to the second theme we've seen emerge from our guests during this first season of Family 360, the philosophy of family.
Author and publisher Lucy Shaw speaks from a lifetime of experience and learning. Her 2005 book, The Crime of Living Cautiously, is not only a great title, but also a great description for how Lucy lives life.
Absolutely. She's so vibrant. Now in her 90s, Lucy continues to write and speak, both as a poet and prose author. We interviewed her from her home in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of Washington State. We are stepping into her interview just after she shared a story about a man who spent his life cautiously invested in certainty of safety, rather than the adventures of creativity and risk.
And I feel in your books and your writings, you're not really big on safe.
I'm not good on safe. Yeah.
What's the problem with safe?
It's so... What's the problem with safe? It doesn't go anywhere. It's dull and it's dead. At least it leads to death. And of course we want our kids to be safe, but we don't want to hem them into such a degree that they never want to reach out and have an adventure or try something new or...
Define hemmed in, Lucy. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you live like a horse in a meadow, a nice meadow, but it's got fences all around it and it can't get out. And yet there's that amazing world of hills and valleys that the horse wants to enjoy. And I think that's true for human beings. We hem them in so much that there's such fear of moving out of that and experimentation and adventure that our lives just become stilted and stale.
So how do you move against that? How do you get up in the morning and choose to live life differently? For you, Lucy Shaw, what do you do?
I don't know. What do I do? It just happens so automatically that I don't even have to think about that. But it's opening up my mind to culture, to spirituality, to the wide world that's available to us as human beings. That's an essential part of the human being, is to have this capacity to move beyond ourselves. Yeah.
Move beyond ourselves. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think it takes courage to be a human being. It would be easy to protect yourself, guard yourself, surround yourself with safe things. But that's a very dry and uninteresting way to live. You have to take risks. I think you have to allow your kids to take risks. Otherwise, they're never going to experience the excitement of taking a risk and having it work out to be something wonderful.
Steve Bell is a Juno Award-winning artist and social justice activist. Childhood suffering and loss brought him a uniquely described wisdom on intimacy and relational connection.
In our conversation, he began talking about how being oriented to others and to the needs of others actually defines us, defines who we are. Here's an eloquent part of what he had to say.
It's really interesting when I'm lying on my deathbed, if I get to have, a chance to really think about my life, and I started thinking about the things that I loved the most about Steve Bell, right? Every single thing that I adore about me is a gift from someone else.
Can you give us some examples?
I'm a son. I couldn't be a son without a mom and dad, right? That's a gift. It's impossible. I'm constituted son by my parents. I'm constituted friend by my friends. I'm constituted spouse by my wife. I'm constituted father by my kids. I'm constituted grandfather by my grandkids. Everything that I actually love about me, about my life, that I appreciate, none of it resides in me. It's all a gift from someone else. And so this whole idea really comes down to then the good life is the life of mutual constituting. It's not my job to create Steve Bell. It's my job to friend you, to spouse you, to, mother you, to son you, whatever it is that makes you who you are, but requires me for that to be true. And when you think about it, most things you love, I bet, about yourself are a gift of someone else.
Figuring out who we are and how we fit in is a complex and ongoing process.
Sure is.
Family therapist David Lois roots his process in relationships and the necessity of adaptation as we grow and develop from infants to children and then on into adulthood.
In his episode titled It's Never Too Late to Have a Great Childhood.
Great title.
It was. David talks about alpha parenting, saying kids can lean into you and feel at rest in your relationship when you're in charge. And by in charge, he means guiding with both firmness and compassion.
In this excerpt from his interview, David describes how a parent's understanding of their child's development directs how they intervene when that child comes into conflict with another child.
So I'm at the community center, the drop-in program. And if you watch, you mostly see parents very close to their 2-year-old. Because if my 2-year-old's walking towards that red car and your 2-year-old's walking, we know there's going to be something up. They can't negotiate it themselves. Yeah. They don't have the language for that. They don't have the ability to perceive others' thoughts and feelings about that. So I'm going to need to mediate. That's my job. But sometimes I'm distracted. And so my kid bites your kid. So what do? I go in. I separate the kid. So I'm holding my kid back and I say to the other kid, I'm sorry, I wasn't watching. I don't make my kid apologize. Have you ever seen a 2-year-old apology? Sorry. You make them say sorry, but there's no remorse in there, right?
No, because they don't understand what's happened.
They have no idea. They haven't developed that yet. 2-year-olds don't have that ability. So why would I expect you to behave like a 6 or 7-year-old who has impulse control and who has developed integrative thinking when you do not have the neurological capacity?
So can you keep carrying through that situation? So you say to him, okay.
The other child, sorry, I wasn't watching. And here you go. This was your car. Now my kid's flipping out, right? So what do I have for a young child? All we have is adaptation. I can't actually talk them through that. I can't reason them. Like, look, you got to learn how to share, right? And if you don't learn how to share, you're not going to have any friends. Like, okay, let's say you do that. Now you come back to the same play group, same dynamic happens. What happens? They don't get the card and they chomp on them. How did your lecture work? Not very well, because kids don't have the ability to do that.
At
so what
2
do I
years
do?
old, right, yeah.
Exactly. So where's the opportunity? What can you do for your child? Well, they're going to be really mad. And they need to learn this process of self-regulation, of moving from this feeling of madness to this feeling of sadness, and do that over and over and over again. And then you learn to become adaptive.
So, just to recap, in this finale of season 1, thank you, Rachel, we're replaying short excerpts from some of our guest episodes.
And we've categorized them into 4 sections of thought: the science of family, the philosophy of family.
And now we're going to share from some of our guests who spoke into some darker places with the heartache of family.
Mm-hmm. We interviewed Dr. Ken Ginsberg, April 2020, several long weeks into lockdowns within the COVID-19 pandemic.
Schools and businesses across the world had closed, and we were all learning the new language of social and physical distancing.
Dr. Ginsberg is an adolescent specialist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania. He says if we want our children to experience the world as fully as possible, our goal will have to be resilience, the capacity to rise above difficult circumstances and to move forth with optimism.
In this episode, Teens in a Time of COVID, Dr. Ginsberg offers wisdom on supporting children through emotional crises of change, upset, and loss.
For example, the chaos of a worldwide pandemic.
Absolutely. He speaks directly to this, and here are some of his wise and timely words.
I think for teens right now, they're dealing with separation from their friends, their activities, their sports have been canceled. And on top of that, there's a loss of their independence. And I think sometimes as parents, we can look at the list of the things our children are concerned about, and we can be tempted to say, you know, it's not that bad. There's people dying, or we've all got to just care for one another. And we can overlook what is really important to them. And you've mentioned empathy, Ken, and I'm wondering, how do we feel alongside our kids? How do we see things from their perspective?
Rachel, super important question. The first thing is, it is human nature to belittle our own emotions because other people have it worse. And, you know, my whole life is about working with the vulnerable. And the worst thing you can do is to say that because you know people have it worse, you deny your own emotions. Because if you belittle your own emotions because other people are suffering at higher levels, then ultimately you will burn out. And one of the best ways of remaining caring and remaining empathetic towards other people is understanding that, yes, other people may have it worse, but I still have a right to my own emotions. Having empathy for other people is a super important resilience trait. And there is no better way, perhaps, to build empathy in our children than to show them empathy. Now is a moment where we can model this. And when they feel like we've understood them, and when they understand and can benefit from being understood, they've learned that they're going to want to understand other people.
Ranbir Kaur was born into adversity and rejection as the fifth daughter in a family and culture desperate for sons. She was raised first in India and then Canada, feeling like a second-class citizen in her home.
Through a gentle challenge from a friend when she was a young adult and her own determination to see herself differently, Ranbir found a way to step out of her feelings of shame and abandonment, realizing her relationship with others would be difficult until she had a good relationship with herself.
I really celebrated being a victim. I think sometimes we forget how comforting that story is and how it fits like a glove. And oh my gosh, I used it to drive me. It was my driving force.
Can you describe how that would have looked?
Oh, yeah. I would sit there and think to myself, if I don't do this, then I'm going to be similar to my mom, who I love so much. She's passed away, but my mom didn't have a life of her own. So I kind of used that as motivation to be not like that. But I didn't naturally switch from being a victim to a victor. I actually met somebody in my 20s who started to challenge my victim mentality, and I would always look at how my past broke me, and I would go on and tell about how I survived this, I survived that. And he would say, and so how did that make you stronger? How did that? So he changed the lens on me, and I found it very aggravating, to be honest, because I had to think about how my past built me, not broke me. And that was very, very difficult to let go of my old sad story and learning to reprogram how I filtered the reality of my life to look for what was right and not what was wrong shifted everything for me.
David Anderson is director of Arasha, BC, working with children and families in outdoor pursuits as both therapy and environmental education.
In 2016, David's family lost their young daughter, Taya, to cancer. Their journey of grief continues as they reconcile new forms and nuances of their pain. In our conversation with David, he gently and profoundly shares his difficult processing in the midst of loss.
We fear pain, right? Naturally, all of us as humans, we fear pain. I think all of us know the struggle of, is the inevitable challenge and the frustration and the pain that's going to be associated with this challenge, is it going to be worth it? Because we can protect ourselves from pain. Like, we can shut ourselves off from other relationships, from people, from circumstances, from risk. We can shut ourselves off from risk. we can choose not to risk.
Trying to protect our hearts.
Trying to protect our hearts. And I understand that, particularly for folks whose hearts have been broken or who have experienced great pain. But in our case, losing Taya was obviously, it's a horror in our lives. Like it's hard to find words. It's like a hole in your life. But when I compare all the pain and the suffering that we've gone through in our journey with cancer and our loss of Taya, if I compare that to the joy of who she was and the gift of having her in our lives for the 10 years that we had her, it isn't a comparison. As deep as the hurt is, it doesn't hold a candle to the joy and the gift of what it was to be a parent to her and to have the privilege of knowing who she was and her unique presence in the world. The joy so far outshines the pain, even though the pain is really deep.
We're drawing to a close with our fourth and final theme synopsis from our first season of Family 360.
Yeah, there are way more than 4 themes, but you can only pack so many into one episode.
Yeah, that's right. And we may have even overdone it as it is, but we hope not.
We haven't. So we've looked at the science of family, the philosophy of family, the heartache of family.
And we're finishing with the potential of family.
Yeah, particularly amidst the uncertainty of this last year.
2020.
Mm-hmm. We sometimes need to be reminded of our potential as people.
We do, because if we rely just on the media and the internet, it can feel like hope is lost for our potential as people.
And it's not.
No, not at all. As so many of our guests so encouragingly remind us.
Born in Cairo to Armenian parents, Rafi Kavukian immigrated into Canadian life at the age of 10.
Known simply as Rafi by his millions of fans, Rafi spent the last 4 decades writing and singing songs to elicit fun, joy, and respect for the earth, each other, and ourselves. He offers his platform as a singer and an author to recognize the importance of childhood as the gateway to our shared humanity.
If you're curious about the world, you've got to be curious about other cultures. Why fear them when you can find them interesting? Mm-hmm. Why not be curious about, you can say, oh, you do it that way. Oh, those are the foods you love. Can I taste that? Here's the positive vision. If you think about a 6-month-old, in a number of different cultures, that child with different colored skin, different facial features, from different ethnicities and regions of the world, it's the same physiological being. We are essentially the same physiological beings at the start of life. Hello, that's wonderful. Secure in the knowing of how much we have in common, we can then celebrate our differences because they're interesting. This is the glory of being human, and we get to celebrate and enjoy it.
Maggie Dent is one of Australia's favorite parenting educators and authors.
Her warm and genuine approach gives her an accessible wisdom that's won her the title Queen of Common Sense.
She was filled with stories and laughter, and we are going to drop into her episode titled The Road to Resilience, as Maggie is about to jump into a story about her own road to resilience as she worked through the childhood challenge of not being able to run fast.
One of the problems around resilience is we've made it seem like we're supposed to live perfect lives where things don't go wrong. So when I look at resilience, I think in childhood we need to embrace that adversity can be a powerful teacher, that failing is a wonderful teacher. And one of the stories I do share is that I have such a good dad who identified I can't run fast.
I love the story.
It's such a good story because he said, look, you can't run fast, darling. And I think we need to have conversations with our kids that they're not good at everything. But he said, if it feels awful always coming last, why don't you wave at the crowd? Now, that strategy, oh my goodness, it just changed me feeling like a loser to a winner. And sometimes I waved so much I fell over, which was also quite funny. And then I learned about caring for the person who was also coming last with me. So I often hooked arms with people. But the second side to that, and this is one of the most important concepts of resilience, is my dad had said, I always want you to have a go.
Yeah.
So even if you've
you're
got
not gonna win.
no chance of winning, like you've got none at all, I want you to turn up and have a go. And that really is one of those kind of mindsets that really helps us become resilient later. And also what happens if I fail my spelling test and I come home and I'm feeling yuck, you know, that failure is a moment where I have to go, on the day it didn't go how I planned, I'm not any less worthy than I was the day before or the day after. So we've made it a bit wrong, especially with our test-driven world, that somehow or other, sometimes our children are feeling that if I don't pass the test, my parents won't love me the same. So the ultimate journey is we can learn from mistakes, and that sometimes they can happen randomly or because we just didn't put enough effort in.
Yeah.
But you are loved exactly the same.
Yeah.
Our last but certainly not least guest.
There's no least guest. We love them all.
Okay, Rachel. Yes, we do. So our final guest from this episode is Dr. Gordon Neufeld. Dr. Neufeld is a child psychologist, author, and developmental theorist.
In an address to the United Nations during the Year of the Family, Dr. Neufeld introduced a framework he called the Pyramid of Potential, which serves as a model for the irreducible needs of a child.
Dr. Neufeld is a world leader in attachment theory, an understanding of how the parent-child relationship emerges and influences subsequent development.
Potential isn't something you practice. It's not something you can teach. You could have 3 PhDs, go to the best schools in the world, and be incredibly immature. Even the best preschool in the world cannot foster maturation. The best university in the world can't do it. This is home stuff. The true personality is homegrown, not school-grown. It is what happens at home. And it's only in home where these basic developmental needs can be met, these attachment needs. That is where a child is meant to feel taken care of. It's so many parents feel, well, if I could get my child to the best schools, all the way from Ivy League universities to the best preschool, and they think that then it's taken care of, their responsibilities are. It's what's happening on the home front that has always been the most important. This leads to the realization of human potential.
Quote you've incorporated into quite a few of this season's interviews, Rachel, is one by Mahatma Gandhi, where he says, if we want to reach peace in the world, we must begin with the children. And I know that is also a motivating factor behind all that you do with Wind and Tide, your company, and your child development community, and it's also foundational in this podcast.
The quote's brilliant in its simplicity because to begin with the children requires starting as the adults that raise the children.
Yeah.
Gandhi's words implore us as adults to raise children towards peace, and that takes mindfulness and wisdom.
Yeah. So this podcast at its heart is helping nurture adults who in turn nurture children.
Exactly. We want to be good stewards to future generations.
Becoming good ancestors.
Yeah, that's a great phrase.
That is also at the heart of all our guests.
Yeah.
Finding a way toward peace for children, families, and communities.
Conversations on all the ways we are family to each other.
We need that. 2020 has made that abundantly clear.
Abundantly.
So we hope you will join us for Season 2 of Family 360.
Yes.
Our first episode will release on Tuesday, January the 5th, 2021, with mental health specialist Dr. Sharon Smith.
Yes, a very interesting episode with Sharon as she talks from vast experience on friendship as a key factor in care for mental health.
A really interesting conversation. So please join us for Season 2.
I'm Rachel Cram.
And I'm Roy Salmond.
And thank you for listening to Family 360. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe.
Rate the show, leave a comment, and tell a friend.
To continue these conversations, find us at Family 360 on our website, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
We'd love to journey with you.